Hi, everyone. This is Global Podcast, your window to the world. Breaking news, big ideas, your global hangout for what's happening now, and bold conversations. Wherever you are, we're bringing it to you. Let's get started.
Okay, the learner. You know, when you're scrolling and scrolling, and it's just headlines, headlines, headlines, and every single one wants your attention. It's like the world is getting more and more complicated every single day, right? It can feel a little overwhelming. So that's why for this deep dive, we're going to try something different. We're taking all this information you've sent us, all those articles and all that research, and we're going to pull out what's really important, like the stuff that really matters. We're going to cut through the noise, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really interesting about what we're looking at today is just how broad it is. We've got potential changes in like major conflicts around the world. Then there's like regional tensions bubbling up. And we're even going to touch on what the weather's doing in Delhi. Now, I know that might sound kind of random all thrown together, but stick with us, the learner. As we go through all this, you'll start to see how all these seemingly separate things can actually be connected in some pretty interesting ways.
Yeah, and our mission here is really simple. We're your guides through all of this. We're going to point out the important stuff, explain why it matters, and we're going to do it all in a way that's clear and easy to understand. No jargon, just a straight-up conversation that will leave you feeling informed and in the loop. So let's jump right in. We'll start with a development in Ukraine that could be pretty significant.
One thing that really pops out is this report about a possible joint statement coming from the U.S. and Russia. They've been having these ceasefire talks. And just the fact that these two major players are even talking directly is a big deal. It doesn't happen every day. And from what I'm seeing in these sources, it sounds like the top, which, by the way, were reportedly held in Saudi Arabia, have been focused on some really key things.
Yep. The one that's making the headlines is this potential commitment to eliminate the use of force in the Black Sea. Now, the learner, think about it. This is a super important waterway for global trade, especially when it comes to grain and energy. Even if it's just a preliminary commitment, it could have huge implications way beyond the immediate conflict. They're also talking about a ban on using commercial ships for military stuff, which, you know, makes sense in that context.
Exactly. And if we take a step back and look at the bigger picture, what we're seeing here is a rare sign of potential de-escalation between two of the world's biggest powers. And the learner ensuring safe passage through the Black Sea isn't just about Ukraine and Russia. It has a direct impact on global food security and economic stability. So that's why this is such a big deal.
Yeah, and there's more. There's this idea of a 30-day ban on attacks targeting energy facilities. And this would apply to both Russia and Ukraine. It's supposed to start on March 18th. And there's a chance it could be extended or, you know, withdrawn depending on if both sides actually stick to it. Think about the potential impact on energy markets worldwide if these attacks were to stop even for a little while. It could create some much-needed stability.
What's really interesting here is that it's all conditional. That 30-day window, the possibility of extending it or ending it based on how everyone's behaving, it all points to this deep mistrust. But at the same time, there's this sense of cautious optimism around these talks. It's like both sides are testing the waters, you know?
And the U.S. is playing this facilitating role in all of this, which is also significant. Plus, there's another piece to this puzzle. The U.S. has reportedly agreed to help Russia get back into global markets for agricultural products and fertilizers. This would involve things like potentially lowering those maritime insurance costs, which we all know can go through the roof in conflict zones, making shipping really expensive. And they're also talking about improving Russia's access to ports. But here's the catch. It all hinges on the lifting of certain sanctions that have been imposed on Russian entities.
And that brings up a really important question, the learner. How much are economic factors tied to political goals when it comes to resolving international conflicts? The potential easing of sanctions on these vital exports could be a big incentive for Russia to play by the rules of the ceasefire. But it also highlights how complex and controversial sanctions can be in international relations.
Definitely. And we have to remember Ukraine's point of view, too. The sources we're looking at say that they'll see any movement of Russian military vessels outside designated zones as a violation, and they're making it clear that they're ready to defend themselves. So even though we've got this potential agreement on paper, things could still get really tense because what's happening on the ground and how these terms are being interpreted could clash.
That skepticism is understandable, especially given the history of this conflict and just how deep the animosity runs. It's one thing to hammer out an agreement, but making sure everyone actually sticks to it well, that's often a whole lot tougher. The learner knows that.
Okay, let's switch gears now and talk about another situation that's incredibly complex and worrying. Gaza. It looks like there's a new ceasefire proposal, and this time it's Egypt that's trying to broker a deal. What's in this plan?
From what I'm seeing, the learner, this Egyptian proposal seems to be all about a phase exchange. The first step would be Hamas releasing 5 Israeli hostages every week. And this is important. One of those hostages would be an American Israeli. So now you've got this international dimension adding another layer of complexity to the whole thing. And it's important to remember we're talking about a situation where sources suggest 59 hostages are being held and only 24 of them are thought to be alive.
And in exchange for these releases, Israel is supposed to gradually withdraw from Gaza. The U.S. is apparently offering guarantees to back up this withdrawal. The proposal also includes provisions for more humanitarian aid going into Gaza and the potential release of some Palestinian prisoners.
What really jumps out of the learner is that both the U.S. and Hamas have apparently said they support this Egyptian proposal. But here's the thing. We haven't heard an official response from Israel yet. And that's a big deal. Hamas is already pointing to past situations where they say Israel broke ceasefire agreements. They're basically saying they don't trust Israel, which, isn't surprising given the history here.
And all of this is happening against the backdrop of some truly horrific violence. Reports say almost 700 Palestinians have died since the fighting started up again after that 2-month ceasefire. That number, the learner, that just shows how desperately everyone needs a lasting solution.
And Egypt's role as a mediator is crucial here, the learner. They've been trying to de-escalate tensions in this region for a long time. This latest proposal is just another example of that. They're trying to navigate an incredibly volatile and emotionally charged situation.
And we should also mention that Pope Francis has made a statement calling for an immediate end to the violence in Gaza and for a ceasefire. When a global figure like that speaks out, it just underlines how worried the international community is about the humanitarian disaster that's unfolding.
It adds this moral urgency to the need for de-escalation, getting back to diplomacy, the learner. It's like a megaphone amplifying the voices of everyone around the world who wants this suffering to end.
Okay, let's move on now to some regional unrest and political developments in other parts of the world. Our sources are pointing to Istanbul in Turkey, where protests have been going on for 7 nights in a row. When you see sustained public demonstrations like that, the learner, it tells you there's some serious discontent brewing.
Yeah, and the fact that the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, has been arrested is a major development. It's likely fueled these protests even more. He's a well-known political figure in Turkey, so his arrest has sparked a lot of condemnation. And it could mean that political tensions within the country are about to escalate. This situation really highlights that delicate balance between political power and dissent, the learner.
Shifting over to India, we're seeing that 6 different countries have issued travel warnings for the state of Assam. That's a big deal, the learner. When multiple countries advise their citizens against traveling to a region, it can have a huge impact. The reason they're giving for these warnings is concern about law and order after some recent violent incidents. So there are some genuine safety concerns for anyone thinking of traveling there.
You're right. Travel warnings from multiple countries can affect everything from tourism revenue to how stable and secure a region is perceived internationally. It tells you that these events in Assam have been serious enough to warrant this level of attention from around the world.
And on a related note, within India, the BJP is apparently planning a protest outside the Himachal Pradesh Assembly. They're saying it's a demonstration against what they call mafia raj and a deteriorating law and order situation in the state.
Protests like this are pretty common in democracies, the learner. It's a way for people to show their opposition, and it highlights how different groups see governance and public safety at the state level in India.
We've also got a quick update that the finance minister of Punjab, Harpal Singh Chima, is presenting the state budget for 2025-26 today. This is a big event every year, the learner. The budget lays out how the state plans to spend its money and what its priorities are for the coming year.
State budgets are always important documents, the learner. They reflect what the government cares about most and how they're going to allocate resources across different areas. That includes everything from education and healthcare to infrastructure. So it directly affects everyone who lives in that state.
And lastly, in our regional news roundup, it looks like Canada is heading for a snap election. Prime Minister Mark Carney has reportedly called for one on April 28th. Now, the learner, what makes this really interesting is that it's happening while trade tensions are escalating, and there are even reports of the U.S. making threats about annexing Greenland.
This is a pretty dramatic and unexpected turn of events in Canadian politics. When a prime minister calls a snap election with all this international pressure going on, especially from a powerful neighbor like the United States, it suggests things could get really heated and unpredictable. And then you add the Greenland situation on top of that. It's really unusual, and it throws another layer of complexity into these tensions. It'll be fascinating to see how it all plays out.
And before we wrap up The Learner, a quick local update. It's a warm start to the day in Delhi, about 21.36 degrees Celsius, and the forecast says it's going to be a pleasant day. So if you're in Delhi, enjoy the weather.
You know, it's a good reminder, isn't it? The Learner. Even with all these major events happening around the world on a global and regional scale, everyday life goes on. It's a reminder of how diverse and multifaceted our world is.
So The Learner, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've looked at potential ways things could calm down in those big international conflicts like in Ukraine. We've discussed the ongoing and really concerning situation in Gaza. And we've explored those pockets of political instability and public unrest that are popping up in different regions around the world.
And when you put all this information together, The Learner, the connections between these events become really clear. Decisions and things that happen in one part of the world can ripple outwards and affect everything from global trade and energy markets to political stability in places that seem really far away.
That's the takeaway here. The Learner. How are these seemingly random events, a protest in Istanbul, a travel warning for Assam, a snap election in Canada, connected to those broader global trends we talked about in Ukraine and Gaza? And maybe even more importantly, how does the information we consume and how we make sense of it shape our understanding of these complex connections? Think about the motives and the different perspectives of everyone involved in each of these situations.
At the end of the day, The Learner, by thinking about these connections and actively trying to understand different points of view, you're empowering yourself to be a more informed and engaged observer of our world. And it is a complex world. The pursuit of understanding is a journey that never really ends. And critically evaluating the information we're given is a crucial part of that.
Couldn't agree more. Keep diving deeper, keep asking questions. And thank you for joining us on this deep dive.